Ultimately, Mario's main titles have always prioritized gameplay over their stories. In fact, the latter is usually ignored. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is not a conventional sequel to the 2007 game, acting more like a retelling that reduces the narrative to its bare minimum. Super Mario Galaxy 2 exchanges the first game's superior atmosphere for harder levels, more variety in the world's designs, and Yoshi. It is a trade that pays off in a big way, crafting a sequel that simultaneously recaptures its predecessor's brilliance while still feeling unique. Ultimately, Super Mario Galaxy and its successor are both masterpieces that represent the Nintendo Wii at its best, and there is very little separating the two releases. If someone prefers a more present story, they will likely gravitate toward the original. If they are mostly here for the gameplay, they might opt for the sequel. That said, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is arguably the more replayable entry. The Super Mario Galaxy games are not only the best Mario titles on the Nintendo Wii, but they are among the greatest projects ever made. If someone is a fan of platforming, Nintendo, or gaming in general, Super Mario Galaxy and its sequel should be considered must-play games. Super Mario Galaxy set the groundwork for its successor and, out of the two titles, has a more engaging storyline and a better main hub connecting the worlds. Along with tight controls and near-perfect levels, Super Mario Galaxy is the game in the franchise that feels most like it is taking the player on a grand adventure rather than mostly guiding them through a series of stages. Despite the individual worlds being fairly small when compared to Mario's other 3D masterpieces, Super Mario Galaxy makes up for it with its ambitious narrative that ties everything together, making everything feel more important. Super Paper Mario might be a controversial pick as it marked a considerable departure from its predecessor, the far more RPG-focused Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Blending traditional 2D platforming with basic RPG elements, Super Paper Mario ditches turn-based combat for puzzles and exploration. While the gameplay is generally acceptable, the world is a bit too barren to justify the shift away from combat. Despite its flaws, Super Paper Mario's story is more than good enough to make it one of the best Mario games on the Nintendo Wii. That said, someone needs to go in with realistic expectations and not expect a product similar to Paper Mario or The Thousand-Year Door. The new Super Mario Bros. Lineup of games would eventually fall victim to the law of diminishing returns, but that should not take anything away from 2009's original. At the time, it had been quite a while since a traditional 2D Mario platformer had been released. Consequently, New Super Mario Bros. Wii felt fresh when it debuted. This game showed that the classic Mario formula that put Nintendo on the map was timeless, and it only needed a few tweaks and a graphical upgrade to fit neatly alongside the plumber's 3D adventures. Even though Nintendo played things a bit too safe, the final product was still a highly polished title in the definitive platforming franchise. Super Smash Bros. Cannot really be described as a Mario property, but for the sake of completeness, it will be included anyway. The first game to bring in non-Nintendo characters, Super Smash Bros. Brawl set the framework for the all-encompassing entity the franchise would develop into over the subsequent decade. This entry also introduced online multiplayer and expanded the single-player content. On its own, Brawl is an ambitious and important game, comfortably among the best on the Nintendo Wii. Within the confines of its franchise, Brawl is difficult to revisit, even more so than the GameCube's Super Smash Bros. Melee. While pretty darn great as a single-player or local co-op fighter, Brawl's competitive element divided a lot of people due to being a steep departure from Melee. Consequently, it is among the least replayable entries in the franchise, despite being very good in isolation. It is a shame that Nintendo takes such long breaks between entries in the Mario Strikers series, as the GameCube original and 2007's Wii sequel were both solid additions to the franchise. Mario Strikers Charge suffers from many of the same issues that plague Mario Super Sluggers, primarily a disappointing amount of single-player content and gameplay that is explosive but shallow. However, the former's matches are just more entertaining, over-the-top, and fast-paced. In some ways, Mario Strikers Charged is the best soccer game on the Nintendo Wii, at least in terms of pure mayhem and silliness. Even with the release of Mario Strikers Battle League for the Switch, Charged is still the sub-series peak. Every Mario Kart game is, at the bare minimum, fun when played with a few friends. The Wii entry is no different in that regard, but it has arguably aged worse than most other entries in the franchise. Nintendo is prone to the occasional gimmick, but the publisher tends to allow its mainline projects to be fairly timeless. Mario Kart Wii is a rare exception since it emphasizes motion controls, going as far as to ship with a steering wheel that did not add much. That said, it is still a good game. Even if not quite on the same level as Mario Kart Double Dash or the vastly superior Mario Kart 8, the Wii entry delivered perhaps the most accessible entry in the series up to that point. Mario Kart Wii's multiplayer modes, quick-to-grasp mechanics, and tracks made it one of the must-own titles on the console. Released as a celebration of the franchise's 25th anniversary, Super Mario All-Stars is a compilation consisting of Super Mario Bros. 1 to 3 and the Lost Levels. This package originally came out on the SNES, and while the Wii release does include some extras, the games themselves are straight ports. This is a difficult one to rank, as of course these games are masterpieces that have stood the test of time. When it comes to 2D platformers, the original Super Mario Bros. Trilogy is almost unmatched in terms of quality, particularly the third game. However, as a Wii release, there isn't much to get excited about here. Mario and Sonic coming together to compete in the Olympics might not have been exactly what most fans pictured for a crossover between these two behemoths of gaming, but the Mario Sonic series did produce a pretty fun game at its second go of things. Mario Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games is an improvement in nearly every area over its 2007 predecessor. This time around, the sports are quite fun to play, and the single-player mode is structured in a way that makes the whole thing feel far more epic and eventful. The controls are also more intuitive, opting to dial down on the motion controls. For those interested in trying this series, Mario Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games is the place to start. There is nothing particularly exciting about the Dr. Mario series, and the same holds true for its 2008 WiiWare entry. As a Nintendo-inspired take on Tetris, these games tend to have just enough charm to elevate an otherwise competent but unspectacular gameplay loop. Although it may not convert anyone who is not particularly into these types of arcade puzzle titles, Dr. Mario Online RX is nevertheless a serviceable entry in a franchise that loves to play it safe. The highlight of the package is a mini-game taken from Brain Age 2. Even though it is far from horrible, Dr. Mario Online RX is one of the weaker games starring Nintendo's mascot on the Wii. Mario Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games suffers from series fatigue, especially since this franchise's nature demands that certain events are repeated from entry to entry. 2011's game is considerably better than 2007's iteration, but the former shares quite a few common sports with the latter. Now, in all fairness, Mario Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games improves its repeat events and does a great job showcasing its location. While solid overall, this is still ultimately a forgettable and unoriginal game. Compared to Mario Kart, Mario Party has not proven to be quite as consistently good, and the spin-off series went through a particularly turbulent patch during the Wii era. Mario Party 8 represented a franchise running on fumes, one that desperately needed an injection of creativity in its single-player content. Despite not bringing much in the way of new ideas to the plate, Mario Party 8 repeats the franchise's standard formula to an acceptable degree, and it is generally looked back on more fondly than the more experimental sequels. The boards were good in 2007 and hold up pretty well, and they are elevated by Nintendo's typical high production value. During a time when Nintendo's multi-talented plumber was an expert in every sport under the sun, it was not unheard of for Mario's colorful cast to pick up a baseball bat and have a few matches. Like Mario's other sports games, Mario Super Sluggers prioritizes accessibility over depth. And for the most part, it succeeded in that endeavor, delivering a gameplay loop that most people can pick up and grasp regardless of their gaming experience. While making great use of the Wii Remote, Mario Super Sluggers is nothing more than just fine as an overall package. Although not a terrible title on its own, it lacks much in the way of content and gets old rather quickly. Still, it is a decent way to spend an hour or two, especially if somebody can find a partner who is willing to join them. Beyond that, Mario Super Sluggers is just a mediocre reminder that the Switch was hardly the first console to struggle with the franchise's sports spin-offs. Fortune Street, aka Tadaki Street, has a long legacy in Japan, but the franchise had to wait until 2007 to make its debut in North America. Developed by Square Enix, this Wii release brings together Mario and Dragon Quest in a board game setting. Fortune Street plays somewhat similarly to Monopoly, although the former is a more nuanced experience that doesn't revolve quite as heavily around luck. Fortune Street might not be the type of crossover that will get everyone excited, but it does what it sets out to do quite well. Mario certainly got a good workout on the Wii, but Nintendo opted against releasing a new tennis game on the platform. As a substitute, the GameCube's Mario Power Tennis got itself a remake that primarily focuses on adapting the game's controls for the Wii Remote. Mario Power Tennis is still one of the mascot's best sports games, and the new Play Control version retains quite a bit of the original's charm. The controls are not as intuitive or easy to grasp as the GameCube original, but the game is still enjoyable and a worthwhile pickup for people who only own a Wii. That said, it is difficult to give this release too much credit since ultimately there is very little new content here. Mario Party 9 deserves credit for trying to shake up the spin-off series' stale formula. Unfortunately, most of the changes were not for the better. Rather than a traditional board game, all the characters in Mario Party 9 are placed in a car and sent to travel as a collective, a change that essentially eliminates any sense of strategy and individuality in matches. Due to this decision, the boards are generally quite one-dimensional and linear, making matches feel one-note and devoid of personality. Despite all those questionable decisions, Mario Party 9's mini-games are generally decent. Peak precision, skyjinks, and player conveyor are all top-notch, and they are hardly the only ones. Unfortunately, they are stuck in one of the franchise's most underwhelming entries. Mario Sonic at the Olympic Games was an underwhelming way to launch a crossover series featuring Nintendo and Sega's iconic mascots. Minigame collections can be entertaining, but 2007's title was extremely shallow in nearly every department and failed to take advantage of the potential offered by the Olympic gimmick. The inconsistent motion controls also did not help. Mario Sonic would produce a couple of decent games, but the first entry was not one of them. When it comes to the Summer Games, 2011's Mario Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games is the far better pick. Mario Sports Mix collects 4 popular sports that Nintendo presumably believed could not stand on their own as spin-offs. Unlike Mario Strikers Charged and Mario Super Sluggers, Mario Sports Mix does have something resembling a story, even if everything once again boils down to 4 tournaments. The Mario Sports games are never especially deep, but Mario Sports Mix found a way to make its mechanics even simpler. While the game offers volleyball, hockey, dodgeball, and basketball, neither one is enjoyable enough to be worth revisiting once the short campaign is completed. The result is a game that offers some quantity but very little in the way of quality.